The new CEO, my husband's brother, fired me. I built the empire, he just wore the suit. I'm standing in my own office, and my brother-in-law, Liam, is sitting in my chair. He's not here for a meeting. He's here for a kill. Emma, we're going in a different direction, he says. Then he slides a termination letter across the table I paid for. My husband, the man I shared a bed with for 15 years, isn't in the room to defend me. He's in the Hamptons with a woman half my age, waiting for the call that I've been discarded. Liam thinks he just fired a minority partner. He thinks he's taking over a kingdom. What he doesn't know, what they both forgot, is that I didn't just build the foundation. I own 82% of the land it sits on. By the time the sun sets on Miami today, they won't just be out of a job, they'll be out of a life. The question is, how long should I let them celebrate before I pull the trigger? Miami. The very name conjures images of endless summer, turquoise waters, and dreams spun into reality under a relentless sun. For years, it was my canvas, my sanctuary, the backdrop to a life I thought was meticulously crafted, secure. My name is Emma, and this is the story of how my perfectly curated world imploded, only to be rebuilt, brick by silent brick, into something far more formidable. It began subtly, as all seismic shifts do, a tremor beneath the surface of what seemed unshakable. My husband, Michael, a man whose charm was as potent as the Miami heat, and I had built a life here. A beautiful home overlooking the bay, a vibrant social circle, and a company, Ascendant Digital, that was the jewel in our crown. Michael was the face, the visionary, the one who spoke in grand gestures and commanded rooms. I was the quiet architect, the one who understood the delicate dance of algorithms and market trends, the one who built the foundations while he painted the dreams. We were a team, or so I believed. Our partnership was forged in the fire of ambition, sealed with the intimacy of shared pillow talk and late-night strategy sessions. Ascendant Digital wasn't just a company, it was our third child, born from countless sleepless nights and a shared hunger for innovation. We poured everything into it, our savings, our youth, our very souls, and it flourished. From a small, cramped office downtown, we grew into a gleaming edifice in Brickell, a testament to what two people, bound by love and ambition, could achieve. But beneath the polished facade, cracks were beginning to form, invisible to the casual observer, but slowly, inexorably widening for me. Michael had always been close to his brother, Liam. Liam, younger by 5 years, possessed a restless energy, a hunger that bordered on impatience. He joined Ascendant Digital fresh out of business school, bright-eyed and brimming with theoretical knowledge. Michael, ever the generous older brother, had brought him in, mentored him, and given him increasing responsibility. I saw it, of course. The way Liam's eyes lingered a moment too long on the quarterly reports, the subtle shift in his posture when Michael spoke of future expansion. He wasn't just learning, he was observing, calculating. At first, I dismissed it as youthful ambition, a desire to prove himself. After all, wasn't that the very spirit that had driven Michael and me? One Tuesday morning, the Miami sun, usually a source of comfort, felt like an interrogation lamp. Michael was away on a business trip, a new venture he was exploring in the Caribbean. Liam, usually the one bustling through the offices, was waiting for me in my own office, seated at my desk. A small detail, but it was the first jolt. It felt presumptive. His smile was too wide, too practiced. It didn't reach his eyes. "Emma," he began, "we need to talk." And in those 4 words, the temperature of the room dropped. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the office air conditioning. He gestured to the chair opposite him, a chair I usually occupied. The audacity was almost comical, if it hadn't been so chilling. I remained standing, leaning against the doorframe, a deliberate act of defiance against his unspoken claim to my space. My gaze was steady, calm. Years of navigating high-stakes corporate negotiations had taught me to mask emotion, to project an unyielding front. Inside, a tiny alarm bell was starting to ring, low and insistent. "What is it, Liam?" My voice was even, betraying nothing. I watched him, observing the minute shifts in his posture, the slight tremor in his hands as he clasped them on my desk. He was nervous, yes, but also exhilarated. A dangerous combination. He cleared his throat. "It's about the company's direction, Emma. Michael and we've been discussing some changes." My eyebrows rose fractionally. Michael is in St. Lucia, and our direction is a joint decision, as always. He offered another one of his toothy, empty smiles. Well, that's part of the discussion, isn't it? The structure. The leadership. He paused, letting the words hang in the air, dense with unsaid implications. It was a power play, clumsy but effective in its intent. He wanted me to squirm. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Get to the point, Liam. My patience was wearing thin. The alarm bell was now a clangorous gong in my mind. He leaned forward, his voice dropping, as if sharing a secret. Emma, the board, and Michael, of course, we feel that Ascendant Digital needs a fresh perspective. A more aggressive approach in the market. And with Michael focusing on new ventures, the role of CEO needs a definitive hand. My heart gave a sickening lurch. CEO? Michael was CEO, what was he saying? My mind raced, trying to piece together this sudden, nonsensical narrative. Michael would never. Michael is CEO. He founded this company with me. We built it together. The me was almost an afterthought, a quick correction to his implied omission. Liam chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Oh, we all know Michael's vision was the driving force, Emma. You've been an invaluable partner, of course. The operational backbone. But Ascendant Digital needs a single, undisputed leader now. Someone to steer the ship decisively. He stood then, walking around my desk, coming to stand beside me. His proximity felt like an invasion. He placed a hand, lightly, on my shoulder. And that leader, he said, his voice laced with a predatory confidence, is me. Michael has agreed. I'm the new CEO of Ascendant Digital. The air in the room thickened, suddenly impossible to breathe. Liam's hand on my shoulder felt like a brand. New CEO. Michael agreed. The words echoed in my skull, nonsensical, jarring. My mind rebelled against them, trying to find the flaw in the logic, the hidden camera, the elaborate prank. But Liam's face, usually boyish, was set in a mask of calculated triumph. I looked at his hand on my shoulder, then slowly, deliberately, shrugged it off. My gaze met his, unblinking. Michael would never make such a decision without me. Without consulting me. The denial was reflexive, a shield against the unthinkable. Michael and I were partners. In everything. Especially this. Liam's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. Michael is evolving, Emma. He's moving on to bigger things. His vision for Ascendant Digital has run its course. It's time for a new era. My era. He walked back to my desk, picked up a crisp white envelope, and handed it to me. My fingers, strangely numb, took the envelope. It felt heavy, filled with an ominous weight. My eyes scanned the official logo, the sealed flap. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. My stomach churned. And what does this new era mean for me, Liam? My voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the steel of a woman on the precipice. I knew. I saw it in his eyes, in the way he held himself, in the almost imperceptible tremor of anticipation that ran through him. He sighed, a theatrical gesture of regret. Emma, your contributions have been monumental, truly, but with a new CEO comes new leadership. I'll be bringing in my own team, people who share my vision, who can execute my strategies without historical baggage. Historical baggage, that's what I was. A relic. An impediment. The woman who had birthed the company he was now claiming as his own. The irony was a bitter taste on my tongue. Are you telling me, I managed, the words catching in my throat, that you're firing me? Liam met my gaze, a flicker of something almost like pity, or was it triumph? In his eyes. It's not personal, Emma. It's business. Your last day will be Friday. We'll ensure a generous severance package. Of course. He gestured to the envelope. All the details are in there. You'll be escorted out by security at the end of the day. Escorted out by security. The phrase hung in the air, a final, brutal insult. From the heart of Ascendant Digital, the very company I had built with my bare hands, to being ejected like a common thief. The world tilted on its axis. The world tilted. My vision blurred for a moment, then sharpened, focusing with an almost painful clarity on Liam's face. He looked younger, harder, stripped of the respectful deference he usually afforded me. This wasn't just a corporate decision. It was a personal declaration of war. And the weapon was Michael. My mind, usually a whirl of strategies and solutions, felt strangely still. It was the calm before the storm, the eerie silence before a devastating hurricane. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't plead. I didn't even argue. There was an icy coldness spreading through my veins, displacing the shock. My focus narrowed. And Michael? I asked, my voice flat. Did he really agree to this? To me being discarded? The word felt like shattered glass in my mouth. Liam shifted, a momentary discomfort. He's supportive of the new direction, Emma. He trusts my leadership. He believes this is what's best for Ascendant Digital. He avoided my gaze, looking at the city skyline outside my window. He couldn't quite meet my eyes when he spoke of Michael's supposed betrayal. A tiny seed of doubt began to sprout in my mind, a fragile shoot of suspicion that would later grow into a thorny vine. I clutched the envelope, its sharp edges biting into my palm. It felt like an eviction notice from my own life. Ascendant Digital wasn't just a company to me. It was the embodiment of my identity, my intelligence, my tireless effort. Every successful campaign, every innovative product launch, every single employee hired and nurtured, I had been there, intimately involved in every step. And now, I was being told I was expendable. The injustice burned, hot and fierce, beneath my placid exterior. But I knew better than to show it. Rage, unleashed, was a weakness. Cold fury, simmering beneath a veneer of calm, was a weapon. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. I understand, I finally said, the words tasting like ashes. It wasn't an admission of defeat, but a recognition of the new battlefield. My world had changed, irrevocably. The woman who walked into this office this morning was gone. In her place stood someone harder, colder, stripped of illusion. Liam looked surprised, perhaps expecting tears or an outburst. He recovered quickly. Good. Then we're clear. You have until Friday. He turned to leave, his stride confident, victorious. He had no idea the war he had just declared. He had no idea. He simply didn't know. That was the most exquisite irony of it all. Liam, strutting out of my office, a triumphant smile playing on his lips, completely oblivious to the vast chasm of knowledge that separated us. He thought he had dealt a final blow. He thought I was simply Michael's wife, a capable but ultimately secondary figure in the Ascendant Digital narrative. He couldn't have been more wrong. As the door clicked shut behind him, the silence in the room was deafening. The Miami sun still streamed through the panoramic windows, oblivious to the storm brewing within me. I slowly walked to my desk, the envelope still clutched in my hand. I opened it, the crisp paper rustling softly. The termination letter was formal, sterile, devoid of any genuine emotion. It outlined the severance package, the terms of my departure, the legal boilerplate of a company dismissing an employee. Employee. The words stung. I wasn't an employee. I was a founder. I was the architect of its success, the quiet force behind its innovation. While Michael was the charismatic orator, inspiring the masses, I was the one translating his grand visions into executable strategies, meticulously building the systems, the teams, the very infrastructure that made Ascendant Digital a powerhouse. I pulled out a second document from the envelope, a share buyback agreement. It stated that as part of my departure, the company would buy back my minority stake, the 18% I publicly held for a predetermined, somewhat generous sum. 18%. The number stared up at me, a blatant testament to Liam's ignorance. 18% was what everyone thought I owned. It was the public face, the tidy figure we had presented to the world, to avoid complicating Michael's narrative as the sole, singular founder. It was a strategic decision made years ago, to streamline fundraising and simplify public perception. But the truth, the real truth, was buried deep in the original incorporation documents, in the private ledgers, in the agreements Michael and I had signed in the nascent days of Ascendant Digital, long before Liam was even a blip on the corporate radar. I walked to the wall of my office, adorned with framed awards, magazine covers featuring Michael, and a large, minimalist rendering of the Ascendant Digital logo. I ran my fingers over the sleek design. This was mine. It had always been mine, as much as it was Michael's. More, perhaps, in the way a mother feels ownership over the child she birthed, regardless of paternity. Liam thought he was taking Michael's company. He thought he was taking my 18%. But he had just fired the woman who owned 82% of Ascendant Digital. And he had absolutely no idea. He had absolutely no idea. That staggering, beautiful truth landed in my gut with the force of a revelation. cutting through the shock and the pain. It wasn't just a secret, it was a weapon. A silent, devastating weapon that had been carefully stored, waiting for an occasion I never in my wildest dreams imagined would come. The 82% ownership wasn't a fluke. It was a deliberate choice made early on. When we founded Ascendant Digital, Michael had the connections, the charisma, the public-facing talent. I had the technical expertise, the business acumen, and the initial capital, a significant inheritance from my grandmother. Michael, in his youthful idealism and trust, had insisted on making my contribution transparent and undeniable. We had agreed that while he would be the public face, the majority stake would rest with me, ensuring stability and a clear decision-making authority in the background, should it ever be needed. It was a fail-safe, a quiet power balance designed to protect our future, our family. We'd restructured legally a few years later, creating the illusion of 18% for public records, to simplify things, to create a cleaner, singular narrative around Michael. It was a common practice for founders who wanted to maintain a certain image. The real, ironclad agreements were held in a secure trust, managed by a discreet firm in Zurich, far from prying eyes in Miami. Michael knew. He signed off on it all. He trusted me implicitly. Or so I had believed. The thought of Michael's complicity, or even his passive approval, in this betrayal was a fresh wound, deeper and more agonizing than Liam's ambition. Had he truly become so detached, so enamored with new ventures that he would sacrifice not just my position but our shared legacy? The man I loved, the man I built a life and an empire with, had seemingly condoned my professional execution. It was a betrayal that went to the very core of our bond. My mind, usually so clear, was a maelstrom of emotions. Grief for the partnership I thought I had. Anger, hot and righteous, at Liam's arrogance. And a cold, burgeoning sense of purpose. This wasn't just about my job anymore. This was about reclaiming my identity, my worth, and the company that was intrinsically a part of me. This was about silent justice. I sat at my desk, looking at the city lights beginning to twinkle outside. Miami, the city of my dreams, now felt like the scene of a crime. The next few days were a blur. I went through the motions, clearing out my personal effects, exchanging forced goodbyes with colleagues who offered awkward sympathies. I smiled. I nodded. I maintained the facade of a woman stoically accepting her fate. No one knew the volcano simmering beneath the surface. Liam, in his newfound role as CEO, passed my office frequently, a smug satisfaction radiating from him. He thought he had won. He thought he was charting a new course. He had no idea I was about to redraw his entire map. He had no idea I was about to redraw his entire map. Every confident stride he took past my office, every knowing glance he exchanged with the board members he'd courted, fueled the quiet inferno within me. I was a ghost moving through my own company, watching the man who had usurped my place, gathering intelligence. I listened, I observed, I absorbed. My final day arrived with a grim finality. I packed a few personal items, a favorite coffee mug, a framed photo of Michael and me from our early days, a worn copy of a business philosophy book that had inspired me. Each item felt heavy with memory, with loss. As I walked the familiar halls for the last time as an employee, I noticed the subtle shifts already taking place. Liam had started redecorating the executive floor, replacing artwork, even changing the brand of coffee in the break room. Small, symbolic acts of ownership. He was trying to erase my footprint, to signify a new era where Emma, the co-founder, was simply Emma, the fired employee. He wanted to claim Ascendant Digital wholly as his own, to strip it of its true origins and stamp his identity all over it. And that, more than anything, cemented my resolve. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about preservation. Preservation of what Michael and I had built, preservation of my contribution, preservation of the very soul of the company. As I reached the lobby, a security guard, a kind man named Frank who had been with us for years, approached me. His eyes held a mixture of pity and discomfort. "Miss Hayes," he said softly, "Mr. Liam asked me to escort you out." His voice trailed off, embarrassed. I gave him a small, genuine smile. "It's all right, Frank. I understand." I extended my hand. "Thank you for everything." He shook it, looking genuinely sad. He knew. He had seen me in the trenches, working alongside Michael, building this empire from nothing. He knew the story. Liam's version was simply, incomplete. As Frank opened the glass doors, letting the humid Miami air rush in, I turned back for one last look at the Ascendant Digital logo above the reception desk. It pulsed with light, a beacon of ambition and innovation. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. The heartbreak hadn't vanished, but it had calcified, hardened into something cold and unyielding. The tears I had refused to shed in front of Liam now transformed into pure, distilled purpose. I stepped out onto the bustling Miami street, the sounds of traffic, distant waves, and chattering pedestrians enveloping me. The security guard closed the door behind me. I was officially outside. Officially severed. But I wasn't powerless. Not by a long shot. Liam thought he had locked me out. He didn't realize I still held the master key hidden in plain sight. And I was about to use it. Liam thought he had locked me out. He didn't realize I still held the master key, hidden in plain sight. And I was about to use it. The first step, however, wasn't about action. It was about stillness. About listening. About understanding the true nature of the battlefield Michael had unwittingly, or perhaps deliberately, created. For the next few weeks I retreated. I ghosted my social circle, ignored phone calls, and turned my beautiful Miami home into a fortress of solitude. My days were spent not in mourning but in meticulous research. I devoured financial statements, market analyses, and industry reports, all focused on Ascendant Digital. I wanted to understand Liam's every move, his every strategy, his weaknesses. I also began to dig into Michael's recent activities. His new ventures in the Caribbean. The vague descriptions he'd given me now seemed evasive, laced with a new, unsettling quality. I hired a discreet private investigator, an old contact I'd used for complex due diligence during Ascendant Digital's early acquisition days. His task was simple: follow Michael. Find out what he was truly doing, who he was meeting, and what role, if any, he had played in Liam's sudden brutal takeover. The silence of my home, once a comfort, now felt charged with anticipation. I found myself drawn to the quiet corners, the places where I could think without interruption. I spent hours staring at the waves breaking on the shore, the rhythmic ebb and flow a strange counterpoint to the turmoil within me. My heartbreak for Michael was still there, a dull ache beneath the surface, but it was overshadowed by a cold, unwavering determination. Liam, meanwhile, was making noise. Lots of it. News articles began to surface, touting his aggressive new vision for Ascendant Digital. He was restructuring departments, bringing in his own people, making splashy announcements about bold new initiatives. He was performing for the market, for the board, for anyone who would listen. He was building his legend on the foundations I had laid, oblivious to the fact that those foundations were still legally mine. Every piece of news about Liam's progress was a fresh insult, but also a new piece of the puzzle. I was watching him, letting him build his house of cards, unaware that the game was rigged from the start. And then, the first piece of information from my private investigator came in. It wasn't about Michael's business dealings. It was about something far more personal, far more devastating. And it changed everything. And then, the first piece of information from my private investigator came in. It wasn't about Michael's business dealings. It was about something far more personal, far more devastating. And it changed everything. I remember the email arriving late one night, the subject line terse, regarding Michael Hayes. My heart hammered against my ribs as I opened it. The report was meticulously detailed, clinically objective. It spoke of Michael's frequent, clandestine trips, not just to Street Lucia but to a discreet luxury villa in the Hamptons. And there, with him, wasn't a business partner but a woman with whom he was clearly intimate. Photographs, time-stamped and undeniable, accompanied the report. Michael, laughing, holding her hand, kissing her openly. A life he was living, completely separate from me, from our shared reality. The betrayal hit me with the force of a physical blow, worse than any firing notice. It wasn't just Ascendant Digital that had been taken from me. It was my marriage, my partnership, my very perception of Michael. The man I had loved, built an empire with, shared my deepest secrets with, was leading a double life. And Liam, his brother, had been complicit in stripping me of my professional identity, while Michael was busy dismantling our personal one. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Michael's sudden detachment, his eagerness for new ventures, His seemingly casual agreement to Liam's takeover, it wasn't just corporate ambition. It was a planned exit. A way to disentangle himself from our shared life, to make space for this other woman, this other future. And firing me from Ascendant Digital was a convenient way to sever financial ties, to minimize my influence, to make the eventual divorce cleaner, easier for him. My heartbreak transformed into a cold, hard diamond of resolve. This wasn't just revenge for a company anymore. This was about justice for a life stolen, for a trust shattered beyond repair. Michael hadn't just betrayed me professionally, he had betrayed the very foundation of our existence. And Liam was his willing accomplice. I sat there for a long time, the glow of the computer screen illuminating the tears that finally, silently, streamed down my face. But they weren't tears of weakness. They were tears of purification, washing away the last vestiges of illusion. When the dawn broke over Miami, painting the sky in hues of fiery orange, a new woman emerged from the ashes of my old life. A woman whose heart was broken, yes, but whose mind was sharper, colder, and utterly dedicated to a singular, devastating purpose. Liam thought he was taking over a company. Michael thought he was escaping a marriage. They were both about to discover that they had merely awakened a force they never knew existed. They were both about to discover that they had merely awakened a force they never knew existed. The hurt was still there, a constant thrum beneath my skin. But it was no longer incapacitating. It was fuel. Michael's infidelity, Liam's ruthless ambition, they were two sides of the same coin, minted in betrayal, and I was going to collect my due with interest. My retreat ended. The fortress of solitude became a war room. My days were no longer spent in quiet reflection, but in systematic, calculated planning. The private investigator became my shadow, digging deeper into Michael's financial dealings, into Liam's corporate maneuvering, into every subtle shift within Ascendant Digital. I needed every scrap of information, every loose thread. My first, crucial step was to secure my position. I contacted the discreet firm in Zurich, the custodians of the real ownership documents. A series of encrypted communications, a review of the original agreements, and a quiet confirmation. Yes, the 82% stake was ironclad, legally undeniable. It was mine. It had always been mine. And no public-facing document, no severance package could change that. The knowledge was a secret weapon, heavy and potent, held close to my chest. Liam, meanwhile, was oblivious. He was busy playing the part of the triumphant new CEO. He held press conferences, gave interviews, and launched aggressive new marketing campaigns. He was spending Ascendant Digital's money, my money, with a reckless abandon, trying to make his mark, trying to outshine Michael's legacy. He had dissolved several long-standing departments, laying off employees who had been loyal to Michael and, by extension, to me. I heard stories through the grapevine, through former colleagues who reached out, expressing their dismay and fear. Each layoff was a small victory for Liam, a consolidation of his power. But each layoff also created dissent, fostered resentment, and weakened the internal fabric of the company. He was burning bridges, cutting ties, sowing seeds of discontent, all in the name of his new vision. And I watched, taking notes, calculating the growing cost of his arrogance. I began to reactivate old networks, reaching out to contacts in the industry, lawyers, financial analysts, seasoned board members, all discreetly, without revealing my true intentions. I spoke in hypotheticals, in general terms, testing the waters, gathering insights into corporate takeovers, shareholder rights, and the delicate dance of power within a publicly visible company. The more I learned, the clearer the path became. Liam had made a fatal error, one rooted in his profound underestimation of me. He thought he had cut me out. He was about to learn I was already inside, controlling the very foundations he was building on. Liam had made a fatal error, one rooted in his profound underestimation of me. He thought he had cut me out. He was about to learn I was already inside, controlling the very foundations he was building on. The silence I maintained was my greatest strength. No public outcry, no legal challenge to my firing. Just an eerie calm that must have, to Liam, signaled my complete capitulation. He would have thought I was licking my wounds, retreating into obscurity. He would have thought I was just Michael's wife, a figurehead who had lost her husband's support. The thought, ironically, almost made me smile. Let him think that. Let his arrogance blind him further. It was precisely what I needed. My private investigator, a man named Marcus, had become an indispensable extension of my will. His reports on Michael painted an increasingly grim picture. Not only was Michael deeply involved with his mistress, a considerably younger woman named Scarlett, but his new ventures were proving to be highly speculative, draining significant personal capital. He was stretching himself thin, financially and emotionally. He was building a new life, a new identity, at a significant cost, unaware that his old one was about to come crashing down. I also had Marcus keep a close eye on Liam. His aggressive strategies, while initially lauded by some, were starting to show cracks. Employee morale at Ascendant Digital was plummeting. Key talent, people Michael and I had carefully nurtured, were quietly resigning, fed up with Liam's authoritarian style and his wholesale dismissal of their expertise. The corporate culture I had meticulously built, one of collaboration and innovation, was being systematically dismantled. He was gaining control, yes, but at the expense of efficiency and loyalty. He was a bulldozer, tearing down everything in his path, oblivious to the fact that he was undermining the very structure he sought to command. I watched the numbers, the financial projections, the market sentiment. Every move he made was a data point, an input into my growing calculation. One evening, I found myself staring at the Ascendant Digital logo on my laptop screen. The sleek, stylized A that represented growth, ascent. It was a cruel reminder of what had been taken, but also a potent symbol of what I would reclaim. The first move had to be subtle, a quiet tremor. Something that would pique curiosity, perhaps even cause a ripple of unease, but wouldn't reveal my hand. It was time to remind them of my existence, not with a roar, but with a whisper. The first move had to be subtle, a quiet tremor. Something that would pique curiosity, perhaps even cause a ripple of unease, but wouldn't reveal my hand. It was time to remind them of my existence, not with a roar, but with a whisper. I decided to make my presence felt on the board, but not directly. The board of directors of Ascendant Digital was a mix of seasoned industry veterans and a few newer, hand-picked allies of Liam's. My 18% public stake gave me the right to attend shareholder meetings, but not to directly influence board decisions as a fired former executive. However, my Zurich-held 82% granted me a different kind of leverage. It gave me the power to appoint proxies, to influence through others. I contacted a trusted, retired board member, Evelyn Reed. Evelyn had always been a quiet supporter of my work, a woman of impeccable integrity who understood the true value I brought to Ascendant Digital. She was fiercely independent and held no love for corporate gamesmanship. I arranged a discreet lunch at a small, unassuming cafe away from the prying eyes of the Miami business district. I didn't reveal my full hand to Evelyn. Not yet. Instead, I expressed my concern for Ascendant Digital's recent direction under Liam. I spoke of the declining employee morale, the loss of key talent, the speculative nature of some of his new initiatives. I presented it as a genuine concern for the company's future, a legacy Michael and I had built together. I appealed to her sense of responsibility, to her long-standing commitment to the company's well-being. Evelyn listened intently, her intelligent eyes missing nothing. She already had her own reservations about Liam's shock therapy approach to management. By the end of our lunch, I had planted a seed not of rebellion, but of scrutiny. I didn't need her to strike. I just needed her to start asking the right questions in the boardroom. Questions about fiscal transparency. Questions about the true cost of the recent layoffs. The tremor was set. Now, I had to wait for the ripples to reach the shore. If you're listening to this right now, and you're thinking about skipping ahead, ask yourself, are you the kind of person who walks away just when things get dangerous? Because what I did next is the reason people like Liam should be afraid of the quiet ones. Subscribe now, or you'll be the one lamenting in the comments later about how you missed the moment the hunter became the prey. Don't say I didn't warn you. Liam's first quarterly report as CEO was approaching. In the corporate world, this is the honeymoon report. He needed it to be stellar to justify his coup. He was pushing the teams to their breaking points, cooking the projections with aggressive optimism. But he forgot one thing. I built the proprietary software the company used to track real-time analytics. I didn't need to hack into the system. I still had my backdoor access, a diagnostic port I'd coded years ago for emergency troubleshooting. Late at night, from my darkened living room in Miami, I watched the numbers flow. I saw the reality Liam was trying to hide, The client churn was 30% higher than he was reporting. The new contracts he touted were mostly letters of intent, not binding agreements. He wasn't just incompetent, he was desperate. He was building a facade of success on a foundation of sand. And Michael was helping him. My private investigator sent me a wire transfer record. Michael had moved $3 million of our joint contingency fund into Liam's personal offshore account. It wasn't just a business move. It was a payoff. Michael was paying his brother to get rid of me so he could run off with Scarlett without a messy board battle. They were using my own money to buy my silence. The betrayal was total. My husband had sold me out for a mistress and my brother-in-law had sold me out for a title. I sat in the dark, the blue light of the laptop reflecting in my eyes, and I realized I didn't want my job back. I wanted to watch them lose everything. Anger is a volatile fuel. If you let it burn open, it consumes you, but if you compress it, it becomes an engine. I stopped crying. The grief for Michael was replaced by a cold, clinical fascination with his downfall. I began my countermove. I didn't go to the press. I went to the one person Liam feared more than a bad review. Our lead investor, a shark named Silas Thorne. Silas didn't care about family drama. He only cared about ROI. I sent him an anonymous tip, just a single spreadsheet. It compared the public projections Liam had shared with the internal real data I'd pulled from the diagnostic port. I knew Silas would recognize the signature of that data. He knew I was the only one who truly understood the architecture of Ascendant Digital. Within 48 hours, Silas called for an emergency audit. The panic in the Brickell office was palpable. I could almost smell it through the reports Marcus sent me. Liam was scrambling, trying to bridge the gap between his lies and the truth. He called Michael, begging for more capital. But Michael was in the Hamptons, distracted, his phone turned off for a romantic weekend. Liam was alone. And for the first time, he was realizing that being CEO meant you were the only one standing when the lights went out. I received a text from Liam that night. For the first time, the smugness was gone. It said, "Emma, we need to talk. I think there's been a mistake with your severance." I didn't reply. I just turned my phone off and watched the moon rise over the bay. Talk? No, Liam. We're past talking. The audit was the catalyst, but the explosion came from a direction I didn't expect. Marcus, my investigator, called me at 3 a.m. He sounded shaken. "Emma," he said, "I found the trust documents. The ones Michael was supposed to keep in Zurich." My heart stopped. "And?" "He moved them," Marcus whispered. "He tried to move them to a shell company in the Caymans 3 weeks before you were fired. He was trying to dissolve the 82% stake by claiming the original partnership agreement was forged. Forged. The man I had loved for 15 years, the man I had sat with at our kitchen table dreaming of the future, was trying to erase me from history. He wasn't just firing me. He was trying to steal my very legacy. He wanted me to be nothing. A footnote. A crazy ex-wife with no claim to the empire we built. But Michael made one mistake. He was a visionary, not a technician. He had hired a lawyer who was greedy, but not careful. The transfer hadn't gone through because the Zurich firm required a physical signature from both founders for any change in the trust structure. Michael had tried to use a digital surrogate, and it had been flagged. The 82% was still mine. But the intent was a knife in my back. I realized then that I wasn't just fighting for a company. I was fighting for my life. I called the Zurich firm. I gave them the authorization code only I knew. I told them to freeze every asset associated with Ascendant Digital. Effective immediately, Liam was about to find out that his corporate credit cards and the company's payroll just went dark. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. I sat on my balcony watching the lights of Miami, and I felt empty. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving behind a cold, hollow ache. I had won the first round, but the cost was the man I thought was my soulmate. I looked at the photos on my phone. Michael at our wedding. Michael at the office launch. He looked so sincere. How long had he been wearing a mask? Was any of it real? I realized that power doesn't change people, it reveals them. Michael had finally achieved the success he craved, and he found that I was the only person who knew who he really was before the money. He didn't want a partner anymore. He wanted a mirror that only showed his best side. Scarlett was that mirror. I was the conscience he wanted to fire. I spent the next few days in a daze of reflection. I thought about the moral cost of my revenge. If I destroyed them, would I become them? But then I thought of the employees Liam had fired. The families who lost their insurance because of his ego. This wasn't just about me, it was about balance. Justice isn't a feeling, it's a correction. As I sat there, a black SUV pulled into my driveway. Michael was back from the Hamptons, and he looked furious. The quiet part of my life was officially over. The black SUV in my driveway was Michael's. He emerged from it, his usually perfectly coiffed hair disheveled, his expensive suit rumpled. His face, usually a canvas of charming confidence, was a mask of panic and rage. He saw me on the balcony, a silhouette against the fading Miami sunset, and our eyes met across the manicured lawn. The man I had loved was a stranger, and the stranger was here to confront me. I descended the stairs slowly, deliberately. Each step was a beat in the drum of my new resolve. I met him at the front door, not opening it wide but simply blocking his entry, my posture firm, unyielding. He stopped short, surprised by my calm. He'd expected tears, hysterics, perhaps even pleas. He found only an empty stare. "Emma, what have you done?" He spat, his voice low and dangerous yet threaded with a frantic edge. "Liam just called me. Ascendant Digital's accounts are frozen. The payroll, the vendor payments, everything. What is this, Emma? Are you insane?" I looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time since Marcus's report. The man standing before me was not the ambitious dreamer I had married. He was a cornered animal, panicked and lashing out. "What have I done, Michael?" My voice was quiet, almost a whisper, yet it cut through his bluster like a razor. "I've merely asserted my rights. My legal rights, as the majority shareholder of Ascendant Digital." His eyes widened, a flicker of genuine shock replacing the anger. "Majority shareholder? What are you talking about? You own 18%, Emma. You signed the documents years ago." He tried to dismiss it, to wave it away as a delusion, but his voice held a tremor, betraying the crack in his composure. He knew, or at least, a part of him knew, deep down, the true arrangements. "The public documents," I corrected, my gaze unwavering. "The ones designed to simplify your narrative, Michael. The real documents, the ones filed in Zurich, the ones with my inheritance as the primary capital, clearly state my 82% ownership. It was our fail-safe, remember? Our protection. Or did you forget that too, along with everything else?" He staggered back a step, as if physically struck. The color drained from his face. The reality, cold and undeniable, was hitting him. He had not simply discarded an employee. He had tried to steal from the woman who owned him. You wouldn't," he stammered, desperation entering his voice. "You wouldn't destroy our company. Everything we built." The hypocrisy was staggering. Our company. The one he had just tried to strip me from, the one he had tried to sell out. You wouldn't," he stammered, desperation entering his voice. "You wouldn't destroy our company. Everything we built." The hypocrisy was a bitter metallic taste in my mouth. Our company. The one he had allowed his brother to rip from my hands, the one he had tried to erase my very existence from. "You speak of our company now, Michael?" I asked, my voice still dangerously calm. Where was this concern for our company when Liam fired me? Where was this concern when you were trying to move my controlling stake into a shell corporation in the Caymans? Where was this concern when you were spending our joint contingency fund, my inheritance, on a luxury villa and a mistress in the Hamptons? His jaw dropped. He looked utterly flummoxed, then furious. "Marcus," he snarled, the name a curse. "You've been spying on me, Emma?" "I've been protecting myself, Michael," I corrected, a hint of steel entering my voice. "Something you clearly had no interest in doing for me. You were too busy building a new life, a new identity, at my expense, a new life with Scarlett." He flinched at her name, a raw nerve exposed. He couldn't deny it. The photos, the financial records, the attempts to dissolve the trust, it was all undeniable. His carefully constructed double life, his perfectly executed betrayal, was laid bare. He tried a different tactic, shifting from anger to a pathetic plea. "Emma, please. Think about what you're doing. This will ruin Ascendant Digital. It will ruin us. There's another way. We can talk about this. I can fire Liam. We can reverse everything. Just unfreeze the accounts. He reached out, trying to touch my arm, but I recoiled, a visceral revulsion. Too late, Michael, I said, stepping back, putting distance between us. The time for talking was before you plotted to strip me of my company and my marriage. The time for talking was before you handed my life over to your brother. Now, the only thing we have left to discuss is the terms of your surrender. He stood there, stunned, seeing the impenetrable wall I had become. The Emma he knew, the Emma who loved him, who would compromise for him, was gone. In her place was an adversary, cold and determined. He finally turned, his shoulders slumped, and walked back to his car. But before he got in, he looked back at me, his eyes filled not with love, not with anger, but with something far more potent, fear. And in that moment, I knew my revenge had begun. He looked back at me, his eyes filled not with love, not with anger, but with something far more potent, fear. And in that moment, I knew my revenge had truly begun. Michael, the man who had always radiated confidence, was afraid. And his fear was a powerful affirmation of my silent strength. The freezing of Ascendant Digital's assets sent shockwaves through the company. Liam, unable to make payroll or pay vendors, was exposed. The emergency audit, initiated by Silas Thorne, quickly uncovered the discrepancies I had anonymously flagged. The press, initially lauding Liam's bold vision, now shifted their narrative, reporting on the sudden financial instability and the mysterious board freeze. Liam called me, of course. His initial calls were angry, demanding. Then they became increasingly desperate. He threatened lawsuits, public slander, anything he could think of. I let all his calls go to voicemail. I listened to each message, dissecting his words, savoring the unraveling of his carefully constructed facade. His voice grew progressively hoarser, more frantic, less confident. He was losing control. My lawyers in Zurich and Miami were now actively engaged. They began the quiet, meticulous process of asserting my majority ownership. They started with formal notifications to the board, to Michael, and to Liam, backed by the original undeniable trust documents. It was a legal siege, slow and methodical but utterly decisive. I also began to receive calls from Ascendant Digital employees. Not just the ones Liam had fired but current ones, terrified about their jobs, about the future of the company. They wanted to know what was happening. They sensed the shift in power, the sudden vulnerability of their CEO. I spoke to them carefully, empathetically, but always with a controlled detachment. I assured them I was working to stabilize the company, to protect their livelihoods. I didn't make promises, but I offered a glimmer of hope, a stark contrast to Liam's panic. This was crucial. I wasn't just taking over a company. I was reclaiming a community. I knew that without the loyalty and talent of its people, Ascendant Digital was just a collection of assets. Liam had forgotten that. He had seen employees as disposable cogs. I saw them as the lifeblood. I began sketching out my strategy for the actual takeover. It wasn't enough to simply assert ownership. I needed to do it cleanly, surgically, minimizing collateral damage to the company itself, while maximizing the impact on Michael and Liam. This wasn't about spite. It was about restructuring. It was about rebuilding. My quiet, calculated revenge was no longer a secret. It was a force now, gathering momentum. And Liam, trapped in the collapsing structure of his own making, was about to feel its full weight. Liam, trapped in the collapsing structure of his own making, was about to feel its full weight. The board meeting was called for Friday. An emergency session to address the unprecedented financial instability at Ascendant Digital. Michael would be there. Liam, visibly sweating, would be there. And I, for the first time in weeks, would return to the gleaming Brickell Tower not as an employee but as an owner. I dressed carefully that morning. Not in the severe power suits I once favored but in something softer, more elegant. A silk blouse, tailored trousers. Subtlety was my new armor. I wanted to project quiet authority, not aggression. I wanted them to see Emma, the architect, the strategist, the woman who commanded respect not through bluster, but through undeniable control. When I walked into the boardroom, a hush fell over the room. Liam was at the head of the table, looking haggard, his eyes darting nervously. Michael sat opposite him, pale and drawn. The other board members looked surprised to see me, a few offering hesitant nods of acknowledgement. Evelyn Reed, my initial confidant, gave me a knowing, almost proud smile. I didn't sit at my old seat. I took an empty chair at the opposite end of the table from Liam, a quiet declaration of my new position. I didn't speak. I simply observed. Liam, flustered, tried to take control. Emma, this is a private board meeting. You're no longer an employee. My lawyer, a formidable woman named Miss Albright, stepped forward. Mr. Hayes, Miss Hayes is here as the majority shareholder of Ascendant Digital. Her 82% stake grants her not only the right to attend, but to call this meeting to order if she so chooses. Perhaps you'd prefer to yield the floor? Liam's face went from pale to ashen. The legal letter had obviously reached him, but he hadn't believed it. He had probably dismissed it as a desperate bluff. Now, seeing Miss Albright, seeing my calm demeanor, he knew it was real. Michael looked utterly defeated, his gaze fixed on the mahogany table. I caught Michael's eye. There was no anger there anymore, just a profound bone-deep weariness. He had lost, and he knew it. Liam tried one last gasp. This is preposterous. There are no records of an 82% stake. This is a fabrication. Miss Albright calmly presented a dossier. The original articles of incorporation, the trust documents, and the full ledger from the Zurich firm, all legally certified and notarized. Every board member has a copy. She slid thick folders across the table. The rustle of paper was the only sound. Liam frantically flipped through the pages, his eyes wide with disbelief, then dawning horror. He was seeing his ruin, meticulously documented and delivered to him by my hand. The quiet earthquake had finally arrived. Liam frantically flipped through the pages, his eyes wide with disbelief, then dawning horror. He was seeing his ruin, meticulously documented and delivered to him by my hand. The quiet earthquake had finally arrived. The room was silent, save for the furious rustling of Liam's papers. The other board members, initially stunned, quickly began to review their own copies, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock, then to a calculated assessment of the new power dynamic. Evelyn Reed cleared her throat, her voice cutting through the tension. The documents appear to be in order, and legally unassailable. Miss Hayes has indeed held a controlling interest in Ascendant Digital since its inception. She gave me another small, approving nod. My quiet word to her weeks ago had prepared her for this, allowing her to process the shock faster than the others. Liam finally slammed his folder shut, his face contorted in a mask of impotent rage. This is a conspiracy. Michael, tell them. This isn't true. He turned to his brother, a desperate plea in his eyes, but Michael wouldn't meet his gaze. He simply stared blankly at the table, his shoulders slumped, his silence a profound confirmation of Liam's undoing. Michael knew. He had always known, and now he was bearing witness to the consequences of his complicity. I finally spoke, my voice clear and calm, cutting through the heavy air. Mr. Hayes, or rather, Liam. You were brought into Ascendant Digital by Michael and me. We nurtured your ambition. We trusted you, and in return, you engineered my removal, based on a fraudulent perception of my ownership. You then proceeded to mismanage company assets, alienate key talent and mislead the board and our investors with fabricated projections. My gaze swept across the board members. The freezing of assets was a necessary measure to prevent further financial hemorrhage and to allow for a full independent audit. That audit has now confirmed your severe misjudgments and, frankly, your reckless disregard for the company's stability. Liam opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off, my voice rising slightly, gaining an undeniable authority. Effective immediately, by right of my majority shareholding, I am formally removing you from the position of CEO of Ascendant Digital. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately, with cause. The words hung in the air, cold and precise. Liam looked like he had been struck by lightning, his mouth worked, but no sound came out. Michael finally looked up, his eyes meeting mine, and in them, I saw not just defeat, but a flicker of grudging respect, perhaps even awe, at the woman he had so carelessly underestimated. Security will escort you from the premises, Liam, I concluded, my voice mirroring the same cold dismissal he had once offered me. The irony was a perfectly sharpened blade. The hunter had become the prey. The security guard, Frank, was waiting outside the boardroom door. He escorted Liam out, a quiet professionalism in his movements. Liam didn't resist. He was broken. Utterly, irrevocably broken. As he passed me, His eyes held a vacant, hollow look, devoid of anger, just an overwhelming emptiness. He had lost everything, and he had done it to himself. With Liam gone, the atmosphere in the boardroom shifted. The tension eased, replaced by a cautious, almost reverent silence. The board members looked at me differently now. Not as Michael's wife, not as a former executive, but as the undeniable power center of Ascendant Digital. Now that the immediate crisis is addressed, I began, my voice clear and calm, we need to stabilize Ascendant Digital. My priority is to reassure our employees, our clients, and our investors. The asset freeze will be lifted, but only for essential operational expenses, under strict oversight for the next 48 hours. I will personally oversee the financial recovery. I looked at Michael, who still sat slumped in his chair. Michael, I said, my voice devoid of emotion, your role in this crisis is concerning. While you are still a co-founder, your judgment and commitment to the company's well-being are clearly compromised. Effective immediately, I am placing you on administrative leave. Your access to company systems will be suspended, and any further involvement will be at my discretion, pending a full review of your financial activities related to Ascendant Digital. He nodded, a barely perceptible movement. He offered no protest. He knew he was beaten. His silence was a stark contrast to his earlier fury, a testament to the extent of his defeat. He simply pushed himself away from the table and slowly exited the room, leaving me alone with the board. Now, I continued, turning back to the board, we have work to do. I need a clear understanding of the full scope of Liam's financial mismanagement. I need an assessment of the damage to employee morale. And I need a strategy to publicly address this crisis without further damaging Ascendant Digital's reputation. We will not sweep this under the rug, but we will control the narrative. The board members, a mix of relief and renewed respect on their faces, began to respond, offering their support, their expertise. Evelyn Reed caught my eye, a small knowing smile on her lips. Welcome back, Emma, she whispered. It was always your company. But I knew this was just the beginning. Reclaiming Ascendant Digital was one thing, rebuilding it, and truly severing all ties with the past, was another. And Michael was still out there, defeated, but a potential loose end. But I knew this was just the beginning. Reclaiming Ascendant Digital was one thing, rebuilding it, and truly severing all ties with the past, was another. And Michael was still out there, defeated, but a potential loose end. My victory was quiet, but my work was just starting. The next few days were a whirlwind of focused, relentless work. I reinstated the asset freeze, but with precise, surgical exceptions. Payroll was released. Critical vendor payments were approved, but all other expenditures were suspended. Every dollar spent was scrutinized. The forensic audit I initiated dug deep into every corner of Ascendant Digital's finances, unraveling the web of Liam's misguided investments and Michael's suspect transfers. I held all-hands meetings, speaking directly to the employees. I was honest, transparent, but also reassuring. I acknowledged the turmoil, the uncertainty, but promised stability and a return to the values that had built Ascendant Digital. I reinstated the key personnel Liam had fired, offering them better terms, and giving them a renewed sense of purpose. Their loyalty, once fractured, began to mend, shifting from Michael and Liam to me. The response was overwhelming. Employees, relieved and grateful, worked tirelessly to help stabilize the company. They provided invaluable insights into Liam's missteps, pointing out areas of waste and inefficiency. My quiet network within the company, dormant for weeks, now reawakened, providing a clear picture of the company's internal health. Michael, meanwhile, remained silent. He didn't contest the administrative leave. He didn't return my calls. Marcus, my private investigator, reported that Michael had retreated to the Hamptons, presumably with Scarlett, licking his wounds. He was wounded, yes, but I couldn't afford to underestimate him. He was a master manipulator, and a cornered Michael was still a dangerous Michael. My legal team began drafting the terms of Michael's official departure from Ascendant Digital. It wouldn't be as simple as Liam's. Michael was still a co-founder, even if his moral compass was broken. I wanted a clean break, a final severing of all ties, both professional and personal. This wasn't just about reclaiming my company, it was about reclaiming my entire life. And that meant disentangling myself from the man who had tried to erase me. I had won the battle for Ascendant Digital. Now, the war for my personal sovereignty had to be concluded. And the next move would involve facing Michael, not as a husband, but as an adversary in a final, quiet negotiation. I had won the battle for Ascendant Digital. Now, the war for my personal sovereignty had to be concluded. And the next move would involve facing Michael, not as a husband, but as an adversary in a final, quiet negotiation. My lawyers advised a mediated settlement, a clean, swift divorce that would dissolve our marriage and his remaining claim to Ascendant Digital. The meeting was set for a neutral location, a sleek, impersonal law office downtown. I arrived early, accompanied by Miss Albright. Michael arrived moments later, alone. He looked significantly older than he had just weeks ago, his usual swagger replaced by a defeated slump. He still looked expensive, but the shine had dulled. The mediator, a stern, experienced woman, laid out the agenda. My lawyers presented the full documentation of my 82% ownership, Michael's attempt to move the trust, and the evidence of his financial transfers to Liam and his personal spending on Scarlett. It was all there, meticulously detailed, leaving no room for denial. Michael listened in silence, his face impassive. He knew he was caught. When it was his turn to speak, he merely said, "I have no defense for my actions. I made mistakes. Terrible mistakes." His voice was hollow, devoid of its usual charisma. It wasn't an apology, not truly. It was a concession of defeat. Miss Albright presented my terms. Michael would formally relinquish all claims to Ascendant Digital, resigning from the board and selling his remaining minority stake back to the company for a symbolic sum. He would also agree to a swift, uncontested divorce, with a fair division of personal assets, but no alimony from me. He would keep the Hamptons villa, but sign over our Miami home to me. It was a generous offer, given his betrayal. I wanted him out, cleanly and permanently. I didn't want a protracted legal battle. I wanted peace. Michael looked at the documents, then at me. His eyes held a flash of something, regret, perhaps, or a longing for the past. "You really are going to take everything, aren't you?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "You left me no choice, Michael," I replied, my voice steady. "You tried to take everything from me. I'm just reclaiming what was always mine. And for your sake, I suggest you sign." "You left me no choice, Michael," I replied, my voice steady. "You tried to take everything from me. I'm just reclaiming what was always mine. And for your sake, I suggest you sign." The silence in the room stretched, thick with unspoken accusations and the weight of a dying marriage. Michael looked at the settlement papers, then at me, then back at the papers. He was cornered, stripped of all his usual charm and manipulative tactics. He finally picked up the pen, his hand shaking slightly. "And Liam?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What will happen to him?" It was a last flicker of brotherly concern, perhaps, or a desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage. "Liam," I said, my voice cold and precise, "will face the consequences of his actions. His termination was for cause. His reputation in the industry is shattered. As for his personal finances, he'll need to answer to the board for any misuse of company funds uncovered during the audit. I will not pursue criminal charges, but I will not shield him from the corporate repercussions." It was a measured response. I wasn't interested in destroying him utterly, just ensuring he could never again wield power, especially over me or Ascendant Digital. He nodded slowly, a sigh escaping his lips. He understood. He finally understood the cold, calculated nature of my vengeance. It wasn't about public humiliation or prison time. It was about surgical removal, about rendering them both powerless. He signed the documents then, his signature a final, decisive stroke ending our marriage and his corporate legacy. The mediator swiftly processed the papers. The divorce was uncontested. The corporate transfer of Michael's minority shares back to Ascendant Digital was completed. In a matter of minutes, a 15-year marriage and a 20-year professional partnership were dissolved officially and irrevocably. As Michael pushed his chair back, preparing to leave, he paused at the door. He looked at me one last time, his eyes filled with a complex mixture of defeat, understanding, and perhaps, a faint spark of the man I once knew. "I truly am sorry, Emma," he said, his voice raw. "For all of it." I didn't reply. His apology, though perhaps sincere in that moment of utter loss, was too little, too late. The damage was done. The woman he had betrayed was gone, replaced by someone stronger, more resilient, and utterly independent. He was leaving not just a marriage, but a ghost. As the door closed behind him, a profound sense of lightness washed over me. The war for Ascendant Digital was over. The war for my life was won, but the rebuilding had only just begun. The rebuilding had only just begun. With Michael and Liam formally removed, the air at Ascendant Digital was breathable again. The cloud of uncertainty lifted, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. I officially assumed the role of CEO, not with a triumphant announcement but with a quiet, firm commitment to stability and ethical leadership. My first official act was to hold another company-wide meeting. This time I spoke not of crisis but of future. I laid out a clear vision for Ascendant Digital, one rooted in innovation, employee empowerment, and client satisfaction. I promised transparency, integrity, and a return to the collaborative culture that had made us successful in the first place. I announced the reinstatement of all employees Liam had unjustly fired, offering them not just their old positions but also a bonus as compensation for their hardship. I restructured the executive team, promoting loyal and talented individuals who had been sidelined by Liam's regime. Evelyn Reed, my board ally, graciously accepted my offer to serve as interim COO, providing stability during the transition. The response was overwhelming. Morale soared. The gratitude and loyalty of the employees were palpable. They had witnessed my quiet, surgical return to power, and they believed in my leadership. They had seen the difference between a self-serving ego and a leader genuinely committed to the company's well-being. Outside the company, the narrative began to shift. The press, initially focused on the scandal, now reported on my swift and decisive return, hailing me as the savior of Ascendant Digital. Industry analysts praised the speed of my restructuring and the clear vision I presented. Our clients, initially nervous, were reassured by the immediate stabilization and my direct, honest communication. The market responded positively. Ascendant Digital's stock, which had dipped during Liam's tenure, began to steadily climb, reflecting renewed investor confidence. The company was not just surviving, it was thriving, stronger and more resilient than before, precisely because it had been purged of the poison that had almost destroyed it. I spent countless hours immersed in every aspect of the business, from product development to market strategy, from financial oversight to employee relations. I was intimately involved, just as I had been in the early days. But this time there was no Michael to overshadow my contributions, no Liam to undermine my authority. This was truly my company, guided by my vision, built by my hands. The quiet revenge had culminated not in destruction, but in profound creation. I had taken back what was mine, and in doing so, I had forged something even better. But there was one last loose thread, a public ghost of the past that needed to be laid to rest. The quiet revenge had culminated not in destruction, but in profound creation. I had taken back what was mine, and in doing so, I had forged something even better. But there was one last loose thread, a public ghost of the past that needed to be laid to rest. Liam. He was out of the company, but his reputation, once aspiring, was now in tatters. The full forensic audit of Liam's brief tenure as CEO revealed several instances of questionable financial decisions, aggressive accounting practices, and outright misuse of company funds for personal gain. While I had chosen not to pursue criminal charges, the board, under my guidance, voted to publicly release a summarized version of the audit's findings. It was a clear, unambiguous statement of why he was removed. The media, always hungry for a scandal, seized upon it. Headlines blared about Liam Hayes's reckless reign and corporate mismanagement. His name became synonymous with failure and betrayal. The industry, a small and unforgiving world, blacklisted him. His career, which he had tried to build on the ruins of mine, was now unequivocally over. I didn't revel in his public downfall, but I felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. This wasn't cruel, it was just. He had tried to steal my legacy, and in doing so he had forfeited his own. The domino effect of his initial betrayal was complete. As for Michael, his carefully curated new life was also beginning to unravel. The public exposure of Liam's mismanagement inevitably brought scrutiny to Michael's role as co-founder and his close relationship with Liam. While he had avoided direct legal repercussions, His reputation as a visionary was tainted. Investors grew wary of his new ventures, associating him with the instability at Ascendant Digital. Marcus, my investigator, occasionally sent me updates. Michael's new ventures were struggling, starved of capital and trust. Scarlett, his mistress, grew increasingly frustrated with his financial woes and dwindling social standing. The glamour of their Hamptons hideaway was fading, replaced by the harsh realities of debt and dwindling influence. Their dream, built on my pain, was collapsing. And I, from my quiet position of power, watched it unfold, not with malice, but with a detached understanding of cause and effect. They had made their choices, and these were the consequences. My focus, however, was forward. Ascendant Digital was soaring. We launched new initiatives, acquired innovative startups, and expanded into new markets. The company, once a battleground, was now a vibrant engine of growth. But for me, personally, there was still a deeper transformation unfolding. My focus, however, was forward. Ascendant Digital was soaring. We launched new initiatives, acquired innovative startups, and expanded into new markets. The company, once a battleground, was now a vibrant engine of growth. But for me, personally, there was still a deeper transformation unfolding. The cold anger that had fueled my revenge began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet strength, a profound sense of self-possession. Months passed. My life was filled with the demanding, yet exhilarating, work of leading Ascendant Digital. I thrived in the challenge, proving to myself and to the world that my contributions had always been foundational, not secondary. I cultivated new relationships, built new alliances, and found a deep satisfaction in the ethical, responsible exercise of my power. Then, one rainy afternoon, an email landed in my inbox. From Michael. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the delete button. But curiosity, a faint echo of the past, compelled me to open it. The subject line was simply, "Can we talk?" His message was short, devoid of his usual persuasive flair. He was in Miami, he wrote, alone. Scarlett had left him. His new ventures had failed. He had nowhere else to go. He wanted to meet, one last time, to explain. A part of me wanted to refuse, to maintain the impenetrable wall I had built. But another part, the part that remembered the naive girl who had loved him, wanted closure. Not forgiveness, but an understanding, a final laying to rest of the ghost of our past. I agreed to meet him at a small, unassuming coffee shop, far from the gleaming towers of Brickell. He was waiting for me when I arrived. He looked diminished. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by worn casual clothes. His face was deeply lined, his eyes hollow, haunted. He was a ghost of his former self, stripped of the charm and confidence that had once defined him. He stood when I approached, a gesture of respect I hadn't seen from him in years. "Emma," he said, his voice quiet, raw with genuine sorrow. "Thank you for coming." I simply nodded, taking the seat opposite him. "What is it you want, Michael?" I asked, my voice calm, but guarded. I was prepared for anything, but deep down, I knew what he truly wanted was something I could never give him back. I simply nodded, taking the seat opposite him. "What is it you want, Michael?" I asked, my voice calm, but guarded. I was prepared for anything, but deep down, I knew what he truly wanted was something I could never give him back, absolution. He looked at his hands, clasped on the table, then up at me, his gaze pleading. "I wanted to tell you everything. To explain why I did what I did." He took a deep, shaky breath. "I got lost, Emma. Lost in the ambition, in the idea of being more than just Michael and Emma. I wanted to be the sole visionary, the singular force behind Ascendant Digital. And Liam fed that ego," Michael whispered, his eyes moist with a regret that felt almost too heavy for the small cafe table. "He made me believe you were the anchor holding me back, when the truth was, you were the only thing keeping me afloat." I watched him. I looked for the spark of the man I once adored, the one who used to stay up until dawn with me, tracing market curves on the back of napkins. But he wasn't there. This man was a hollowed-out version of a memory. He spoke of his failure, of Scarlett leaving him the moment the money dried up, of the creditors circling the ruins of his new ventures. He spoke as if he were a victim of a storm, forgetting that he was the one who had seeded the clouds. "You didn't get lost, Michael," I said, my voice as steady as the heartbeat of the company I now ran alone. "You made a series of choices. You chose Liam's flattery over my loyalty. You chose a shell company over our partnership. You chose a secret life over our shared one. Getting lost implies you didn't know the way. You knew exactly where the exit was. You just didn't expect me to change the locks. He reached across the table, his hand trembling, hoping for a touch, a sign of the old Emma who would soften at his distress. I didn't move my hand, but I didn't take his either. I simply let the space between us remain a vast, silent ocean of everything that had been destroyed. I'm not here to punish you anymore, Michael, I continued. The world is doing a fine job of that. I'm here because I wanted to see if there was anything left of the person I built a life with, and I realize now, that person was partly my own invention. I saw the best in you and ignored the rest, but I see all of you now. And honestly, there's nothing left for me to say. I stood up. I didn't wait for him to respond. I didn't wait for the tears I knew were coming. I walked out into the Miami rain, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of his expectations or the sting of his betrayal. I just felt the cool air on my skin. He stayed in that booth, a shrinking figure in the rearview mirror of my life. As I drove back toward the Brickell skyline, I realized that the ultimate revenge wasn't taking his money or his title. It was reaching a point where I no longer cared enough to even be angry. They say the final act of a play is where the hero finds their true purpose. For months I thought my purpose was the restoration of Ascendant Digital. I thought it was the 82% ownership. But a letter arrived at my office a week after meeting Michael, a legal notice that changed the entire landscape of the game. It wasn't from Michael or Liam, it was from the Zurich firm. Apparently, in his final desperate attempt to win back in the early days, Liam had tried to forge a document that would have bypassed the trust entirely. He failed, obviously, but the investigation into that forgery uncovered something he and even I had missed. The original capital I'd used, the inheritance from my grandmother? It hadn't just been money. She had held a series of legacy patents for the very data compression technology that Ascendant Digital was built upon. When the company went public with its innovative new software last year, we were technically infringing on patents held in a private estate. My private estate. This meant that even if Michael had succeeded in stealing the 82%, I would have owned the intellectual property the company needed to exist. I was never just the majority shareholder. I was the landlord of the entire digital landscape they were trying to build on. I sat in my office, looking at the city below. Liam had tried to fire the person who owned the air he was breathing. The irony was so perfect it was almost poetic. I didn't need to fight him. I didn't even need the trust. I was the source. I called a meeting of the full board, including the new investors Silas Thorne had brought in. I didn't demand more power. I didn't ask for more money. I simply presented the patent discovery and offered a licensing agreement that would ensure Ascendant Digital's survival but would place 100% of the strategic veto power in my hands. Forever. The board didn't even argue. They couldn't. Silas looked at me with a mixture of terror and admiration. He realized that for all his shark reputation he was swimming in a tank I had built. The quiet girl from the early days was now the undisputed sovereign of the industry. The months that followed were characterized by a strange, beautiful silence. The noise of the betrayal had faded into the background, a distant hum. Ascendant Digital wasn't just a company anymore. It was a sanctuary of innovation. We were no longer chasing the aggressive growth Liam had obsessed over. We were building things that mattered. I spent my time mentoring young women in tech, ensuring that no one else would ever have to keep their power a secret just to make a man feel comfortable. I visited the office floor often, not to micromanage, but to listen. I knew the names of the engineers' children. I knew which designers liked their coffee black. Liam had disappeared. Last I heard, he was working a mid-level sales job in a different state, under a different name. The man who wanted to be king was now just a ghost in a cubicle. Michael had moved to Europe, living a quiet life on the small remainder of his personal assets. Neither of them ever contacted me again. I walked into my Miami home one evening. The sunset was painting the walls in shades of gold and violet. For the first time, it didn't feel empty. It felt spacious. The memories of Michael weren't gone, but they were no longer sharp. They were like old furniture, useful once, but no longer fitting the decor of my life. I realized that power isn't about how many people you can fire. It's about how much of yourself you can keep when everyone is trying to take a piece. I had kept all of me, and I had gained so much more. As I stood on the balcony, my phone buzzed. It was a message from a major tech conglomerate, asking for a partnership. I looked at the screen, smiled, and put the phone face down. They could wait. Tonight, the only person I was answerable to was myself. My name is Emma. I was the wife who stayed in the background. I was the partner who did the work while someone else took the credit. I was the employee who was escorted out by security. But I was also the woman who kept the receipts. I was the woman who understood that silence isn't a lack of power, it's the storage of it. To anyone listening who feels like they're being erased, who feels like their contributions are being minimized by the loud and the arrogant, let them talk. Let them think they've won. Let them build their houses of cards on the land you own. Because when the wind changes, and it always does, you won't need to scream to be heard. Your presence will be the only thing left standing. I didn't win because I was ruthless. I won because I was prepared. I won because I knew my worth before I ever needed to prove it to them. The Miami sun is setting now, and the lights of the city are coming on, one by one. Each one is a possibility. Each one is a choice. I've made mine, and I wouldn't change a single step of the journey that brought me here. Stay quiet, stay calculated, and never, ever let them see the master key until you're ready to turn it. If you've made it this far, you've seen what happens when the quietest person in the room is also the most powerful. If you haven't subscribed yet, perhaps it's because you're afraid of what you might learn about your own untapped strength. Or perhaps you're content watching from the sidelines. To those who won't join us, feel free to lament in the comments about how unfair the world is. To the rest of you, welcome to the takeover.